Kevin Coop here, and this is FaceTime with the Content Guy. So I hardly know what to say about the continuing revelations, the continuing accusations against men who have been harassing and assaulting women seemingly for decades. It's all coming out now, but it's just incredibly difficult to believe some of the things that you read in some of these stories. I mean, what are these guys thinking? And by the way, what exactly do you have to have done to settle a case for $32 million so the public doesn't find out about it, it doesn't go into the court system, and your own family doesn't write about it? I mean, I can't even imagine. $32 million. Now, the good news, I think, in the media business, the entertainment business, technology business, and increasingly in some other businesses as well, you're starting to see men pay the price. They're losing their jobs. They're being disgraced. They're stepping away because they recognize that they're behaving in a way that is completely untenable. Now, in politics, not so much, because a lot of these guys seem to think that, well, they can find redemption while they're still in office. Listen, I believe in redemption as much as the next guy. I think I'd rather see these guys do it on their own time and on their own dime. Now, listen, as I've said here before, people who are used to being in the headlines are finding their way into the headlines for this kind of stuff. But I think that's only temporary. I think you're going to start to see a lot more stories of people in other businesses. And this could range from CEOs right down to supermarket store managers. People who are going to end up making headlines because they are harassing and not treating the women who work for them correctly. And I think every industry has to be ready for that. I repeat, if you're any sort of leader in any sort of company, you've got to be prepared. You've got to tell everybody who works in your organization, listen, if you have been harassed, if you have been abused, if you've been attacked, you need to come to me because I'm on your side. And by the way, if you've done anything that is beyond the proper treatment of the people who work for you, especially women, pack your bags now. You need to go because we're not going to tolerate it in this organization. And you have to do that now, especially if you're a predator. Now, you have a moral and ethical responsibility to do that. By the way, you also have a fiduciary responsibility to do it because these are the kinds of things that put companies at risk. This kind of stuff has to be done now. I totally agree with something that Michael wrote earlier this week when he talked about the fact that every trade association, every major meeting out there ought to schedule time in those sessions where they can talk about this issue and they can present to people what the reality of the situation is, how they need to behave, and the kinds of rules and regulations they need to impose on their organizations. This goes for the Food Marketing Institute, the National Association of Convenience Stores, the National Grocers Association, everybody. And yes, I think the Network of Executive Women, I agree with Michael on this, they'd be a great organization to get involved to help people understand how they ought to behave. You'd think they would, but apparently they don't. I keep thinking about this, though. I keep wondering, who raised these guys? Didn't they have mothers and sisters and grandmothers? And how did they not learn? And by the way, who were their fathers? What were their fathers thinking? What kind of role models, male role models, did these people have where they learned to behave this way? It just boggles my imagination. I was really reading a really interesting piece the other day by a fellow named Bret Stephens, who's an op-ed columnist for the New York Times. And I haven't been able to get it out of my mind because I thought it was terrific in terms of how to address this particular side of the issue. He wrote, and I quote, "Many years ago, I committed an offense for which famous men are now being publicly and rightly shamed. I patted an office secretary on her behind. I won't offer the usual lame defense that I didn't know my advance was unwanted or that social attitudes were different back then. My only excuse is at the time of the incident, I was 7 years old. I remember the moment because of what happened immediately afterwards. The secretary, who worked at my father's business in Mexico City, turned around and slammed a heavy stack of papers on my head. I marched indignantly over to my dad's office to report her behavior, only so that he could march me over to her desk and have me apologize. He followed that up with a stern warning never to do anything like that again. I don't remember the secretary's name, but what a service she did for me. By giving me a knock I'll never forget, one that took courage and self-respect, considering that I was her boss's son. And what a service, too, that my dad defended her and gave me the talking to that he did. It's a lesson that every boy should get, loud, clear, and early, from a male role model." See? No excuses, no explanations, no exceptions. This is how, as fathers, we need to be dealing with our sons. These are the lessons we need to be imparting to our sons. And as leaders in organizations, these are the kinds of lessons we have to impart to the people who work for us, because it will gain trust on one side and it will set the rules very specifically on the other. Another line from Brett Stevens. The good news is that, thanks to some brave women, we're at a moment when a great many men are privately re-examining past behavior and wondering how to do better. In other words, we're thinking about how we might act as gentlemen. For now, it's an impulse based largely on fear. In time, it should become one based on hope. I hope he's right. But in the meantime, I do have an idea for how we could deal with the situation right now and make sure there are no problems going forward. I just think we should put women in charge of everything. Because, guys, we're clearly not getting it done. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.